And welcome back. Hip Hop Caucus is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's focused on communities across the United States, addressing core issues impacting underserved and vulnerable communities, with programs and campaigns that support, solution-driven community organization led by today's young leaders. We're pleased to be joined now by the president and CEO of Hip Hop Caucus, Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr. And Reverend Yearwood Jr., good to have you.
It's so good to be here. How are you?
Good. I'm glad. I'm doing good. Can't complain, and living the dream, talking to you. So thanks for being with us.
Well, it's great to be here. A lot going on in the world right now.
A lot going on in the world, but your Hip Hop Caucus organization is really taking a front and center approach with dealing with a lot of the matters that we're dealing with in our society. And so for people who may not know a little bit about the Hip Hop Caucus, how does this all come about?
Yeah, well, this year we turned 18, so we're old enough to vote, I guess, ourselves. We've been getting out to vote for all these years. Well, this year, it's an amazing time. That's one of the key issues for us. Hip Hop Caucus was created back in 2004. It was the gathering of a number of hip hop organizations at the time. It was Diddy, who I worked with Citizen Change, doing Vote or Die. Jay-Z had Voice Your Choice. We had Hip Hop Summit Action Network doing hip hop summits all around. We had the Hip Hop Political Convention. All these groups were working in 2003 and 2004. And it was clear that we needed to bring together an entity that could really push our policy agenda. In essence, how we can use our cultural expression to shape our political experience. And so there you go. Hip Hop Caucus was started back in 2004. And we've been going strong ever since. I mean, there's been a number of things over these past 18 years that have shaped us, clearly from the issue of criminal justice, human rights, environmental justice, democracy, gender justice, on and on and on, that have really crystallized this organization for this moment at this time.
Yeah. And when we talk about hip hop, I mean, obviously, most people will pay attention to the music, but some people lose the fact that a lot of political engagement happens through the hip hop community. Give me a little bit about that.
Well, there's two parts to that. One, on the cultural side, obviously there's an amazing part of using the lyrics. So the artists themselves, or those who are doing graffiti or dance or poetry, however, all the renditions of hip hop are using the politics to create change. And we know this particularly from the creation of hip hop. It's created through the Bronx. I mean, it is literally through the Bronx Causeway that is built up through transportation justice. And in that injustice, that literally divides the Bronx. And when that happens, literally people begin to speak out, and hip hop is created in that moment. And so literally through the building of highways and byways is one of the main factors that contributes to the essence of hip hop. But since that time, and since we've used lyrics and art and dance and fashion, you know, clearly just one of the great things about politics is audience building. You know, you got to build an audience to get out to vote or to, you know, make change happen. And so hip hop is one of the most amazing, powerful audience builders you can imagine. You take an artist and you take some music, and man, you got a crowd. And so we use that to then educate our community to create change.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about a couple of things, the issues that matter the most these days. And just recently, we just concluded the New York primary for voting for the race for governor and lieutenant governor, people taking to the polls there. But when we talk about taking to the polls, really getting people to the polls, I know that's been a push of yours and the organization respecting the vote.
Yeah, Respect My Vote is one of the longest running and one of the most successful hip hop political campaigns ever. We're very proud of that campaign. It has actually world records. We actually have a record of registering 32,000 people in one day across many cities. It's a campaign that really goes to the grassroots nature of getting to our communities who sometimes don't feel their voice matters. We work for returning citizens, those who are coming home from a jail or prison, to make sure that their voice, their contribution when possible can really matter. And so that campaign really has been a wonderful campaign. But unfortunately, as you and democracy is under attack. And unfortunately, there are those who don't want to see members of our community voting. They don't want to see them engaging in the process, creating change for themselves. And so there've been tremendous amounts of roadblocks that have been put up through litigation. And we know that demonstration without legislation or litigation leads to frustration. So we're kind of tired of being frustrated. And so it's time to have folks respect my vote and make sure they get involved. And so we are pushing for better campaign again this year in the midterms and right now currently throughout this election cycle and through the general election cycle in 2024. And we want folks to get engaged, and they can get engaged simply by going to respectmyvote.com to see what they can do. One, to get registered to vote, but two, to see what they can do to help the process.
Yeah, I think about a couple of things. Number one, we talk about midterm elections, they're around the corner, and more sometimes is at stake than even that of a presidential election right now. You talk about primaries and getting people out to vote in primaries. Very important. As a matter of fact, the main reason that we see AOC in office is because she was able to unseat Joe Crowley during a primary. So when you look at really getting people out to vote, particularly as we approach the midterms, what's the sentiment that you're getting from people on the street? Are they hungry to get to the polls, or are they still saying, yeah, just wait till it's the president?
Well, I think people are hungry for justice.
Mm-hmm.
They want that. They're hungry for justice. They're tired of seeing their schools not be up to snuff. They're tired of when they go out to the bus not running on time. They're tired of being situations where they don't have enough money and they don't have a living wage. And so I think people just want justice. And they realize that the way to do that is by shaping policy. They understand that either you shape policy or policy shapes you. And so I think that they're looking to shape policy. And so I think that with that, the only way you can shape policy is through the electoral process, and that's through elections. And so they're looking for people to get in these positions to speak for them. Too many times in the past, though, they voted for people and they got in office and they don't respond. And so I think what you're now seeing, particularly in that election of AOC and others, they're looking simply for people to speak for them, who will have the courage to not to get in these positions to just kind of fall back, but to fall forward.
Right.
To ensure their voice is heard.
Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr., President and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus, and got him here talking about the issues that matter, and that's social justice, and we're talking about that right there. When I bring up the word social justice, what does that mean to you?
Well, for me, it means that people can breathe. It means that we have clean air and clean water. It means that before people can vote. It means that our life expectancy is longer, that my mama, my daddy, my grandma, my grandpa, they're not dying young, they're not dying in their 50s or 60s, but they're dying into the age they should. It means to me simply that we have the justice in our community, that our zip code doesn't determine our demise. And so that's what it means. And so I think for us at the Hip Hop Caucus, we're fighting hard for that. This is not a game. Unfortunately, there are those who want to roll back many of those hard fought games and that we heard about that were on black and white TV. But now that we're in color, we want the games to go into black and white. We want the games to stay in color. So, for me, social justice is literally about us ensuring that we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. I want to talk about your hat for a minute. I know that climate change is huge and on your agenda as well. And speak to us about climate change and your hat.
Yeah, for young people, for many of them, they are dealing with the issue of climate change. For them, it's very important. And so it's important for us at Hip Hop Caucus. We know that our parents fought for equality in the 20th century. But right now, with climate change and other issues, we're still fighting for equality, but we're also fighting for existence in the 21st century. And right now, literally, if we don't make a change in regards to the destruction happening in the climate crisis, then they will have devastating effects. I'm originally from Louisiana, so for me, it's kind of personal because I actually, being from Louisiana, people know we had Hurricane Katrina almost now 17 years ago, and then last year we had Hurricane Ida. So it means a lot to me. I've seen many of my friends and family who've lost their lives or lost everything because of
Mhm.
climate change and climate destruction. So I think we're rising up, but also for our neighborhoods like in the Bronx or Queens or throughout this country. We're dealing with lead poisoning. We're dealing with the issue that 68% of people of color, particularly Black people, live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant, causing asthma and emphysema and cancer. And that can't continue. And so we need to ensure that we take on this climate crisis full on. And so my hat is people versus fossil fuels, that we believe that we got to transition from fossil fuels to a clean energy economy. And we will see that. We must see that in our generation to ensure that we have a firm existence in the 21st century and beyond.
Yeah. So you've got Think 100%, and that's a part of your climate justice initiative. Educate our viewers a little bit more about Think 100%.
Yeah, so Think 100% was about that we have to get to 100% clean energy by 2050. And so the whole Think 100% is about thinking about that process, and what we got to do is we've created a whole kind of network of things to do that. So everything from creating documentaries, which we now actually have out. We have a new documentary that just came out on petrochemicals, which you can go to weshallbreathe.com/films and check out. It's free. Just go there and check it out. And you can also, we also have a podcast that I do and others do called The Coolest Show, kind of a pun on that. We want to make this earth cool again, literally. So we have that podcast rolling out. We also have activism and organizing. So all of that really stems on what we can do to fight this climate crisis.
Yeah. I know the hip hop community really was front and center when it came to the issue of George Floyd. Taking to the streets, leading initiatives, commercials, being at the forefront of saying justice needs to be served. But it wasn't just the first time. I mean, George Floyd was just the tip of the iceberg. We talk about Eric Garner, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. When you look at where we are today in terms of justice and accountability and the organization, hip hop coming together to really raise a voice. It was a strong voice and it had a huge impact. But talk to us about, first of all, back to the George Floyd situation, because when we look at that and the hip hop activism, I think people took hip hop in a new light just in that instance alone.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I think one of the things there that's important is as you mentioned, and you were kind of going back through this timeline of this folks we've lost to tremendous amounts of injustice, to police brutality. We go back, many of us even go back a little further to Amadou Diallo and go back, and it's so we go back to Sean Bell, and you can keep going back in that situation. So hip hop has had a role literally talking about that injustice through their lyrics and growing that. And I think it really hit you're right, a tipping point when it came to George Floyd, probably before. I mean, obviously from Eric Garner and Mike Brown back in 2014. I think that was a critical moment. I think that was a critical moment because we also, hip hop has a unique way that we have to be, and we are post-partisan, where sometimes some of our colleagues can kind of side either Democrat or Republican. And while we are progressive in our stance, it doesn't matter who's in office. I mean, I have been out in the streets. I've been arrested from time when we had Bush, but I've also been arrested when we had Obama fighting for justice. So I think that's one of the great things about hip hop, is that we are about who has our interests. And I think that's one of the things that give us a kind of a unique voice in this, because we really, and when people respond to that voice. And so in this issue regarding the issue of police brutality and accountability and just public safety, I think the hip hop community has been riding that and pushing that forward. I think also I want to say this for the movement you mentioned, because clearly people were in the middle of a pandemic and they were taken to the streets, not only here, but around the world. I think that when the movement is strong, the music is strong. But when the movement is weak, the music is weak. And even for us from the music side of this, our music has changed. Our artists have begun to adopt many of the things because they saw a lot of people in the streets were requiring them kind of in the suites to ensure that their music was different. So we've had a huge change in hip hop in that regard. We're seeing it even in like our telecast, we're seeing it in our music. we're seeing in a lot of different areas how that has changed and continue to change. And we're hoping that also carries over with democracy, obviously for voting and for issues of climate and for education and housing, other issues as well.
Yeah. You mentioned the Bronx. That's our home. Can't mention, can't go anywhere in hip hop without mentioning KRS-One. Talk about people like Public Enemy, all people who had a message of social justice long before social justice was a popular / sexy term. Talk to us about the influence that you're seeing today of hip hop really addressing a lot of these issues.
Yeah, well, first, shout out to all of them. I mean, I'm actually very close friends with Paradise Gray from X-Clan and KRS-One and many of those pioneers who laid it down in their music and in what they were doing off stage as well. They were really true to the cause. So I just want to thank you for those who are watching, those artists in this aspect for what you did. And I think from the Bronx standpoint, I mentioned before, next year will mark 50 years for hip hop. It'll be our 50-year birthday. So we're turning 50. Getting a little long in tooth here, but that's good in that aspect. But I think that, for many of us, where this came and where this goes really starts from the Bronx. I mentioned before how, what happened in the Bronx didn't stay in the Bronx, thank goodness. And we continue to use this amazing gift of hip hop to change the world. I mean, it is one of the most powerful entities of creating change, not only in America, but around the globe. People are using hip hop in France, in the Caribbean, and South America, on the continent, to literally create change. And so it's a very powerful and amazing thing that still continues to be really relevant as we move forward. So I think those who before, created a pathway. I think, obviously, there's a commercial aspect to hip hop, and that's just in any genre. And so they're gonna be parts of this like anything. For me as a president of Hip Hop Caucus, people ask me, I'm president of all hip hop. So I'm like a family Thanksgiving dinner. Everybody come to Thanksgiving. I might like everybody, but everybody come and get a place to eat. But I think that's where we are now. And I think that, we have to do better also to ensure that those older artists are taken care of. A lot of them are passing. My friend Biz Markie is one of them who passed last year. And so we're losing them too. We got to make sure they're taking care of their health is a key part of this. But no, the history of hip hop is steeped in justice and activism.
Yeah, I can't let you go without talking a little bit about students, kids who are still trying to, make ends meet, particularly in this environment. And the first thing you got to deal with after coming out of school is paying these student loans off. So talk to me about your fight and the fight that you want to see for economic justice in the area of student loans.
Well, economic justice has been a key component for the hip hop community, particularly for Hip Hop Caucus. And, we, again, believe that we have to target that through legislation. And so one of the ways to help our community is that many of them are carrying tremendous amounts of student loan debt. And so we're asking for this administration to cancel that, particularly in this climate regarding the pandemic, the recession, what's going on. This is the moment to do that, to help. It's not just good for those people, but it's good for America. And so we're hoping that will take place, that we're pushing for a full, we're getting bits and pieces here of cancellation of student debt in different areas, but we want a full cancellation of student debt to roll things back, to help this country get back on its feet. It's good for America. It's good for everybody, no matter where you are, Republican, Democrat, Independent, it would be good for everyone. But more importantly, that we're looking for economic justice as well. I think we also really have to teach financial literacy, that a lot of folks in our community don't understand how that works, weren't trained how the stock exchange work, weren't trained how to do their bank accounts, weren't trained how to do those simple things. So we are taking that role on as well to ensure that we're training our community on how to be financially literate. And then also ensuring that those entities that were benefited from George Floyd. So a lot of our Black banks, for instance, received a lot of money during the George Floyd situation. And so we want them to begin to return that back to the community. So we're talking with a number of Black banks, and we have a Black bank initiative, working with them as well to help trade up our community and return investments and do loans. People get their houses and all that kind of stuff in this market. So a lot is going on in that aspect, but you can find out everything you want to find out on that. Just go to hiphopcaucus.org and you can find out about our economic justice, our climate justice, our democracy, our gender justice. You can get everything right there. Even you can get some music. You can go online and we got music for you too. So go to hiphopcaucus.org and you get everything right there.
Well, Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr., we got to leave it there. President and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. Thank you, my brother, for taking the time. Got to come hang out with us again.
Most definitely.